Welcome, everybody, to another episode of the From Adversity to Abundance podcast. I am your host, Jamie Bateman, and I'm thrilled today to have with us a special guest, Andrew DeGood. Andrew, how are you doing today?
I am fantastic, Jamie. Thanks.
Awesome. We've been trying to make this happen for a bit now. We've both had issues, and here we are. I'm pumped that we could connect and bring some value to our listeners. Andrew, you are a tech entrepreneur. You've had some at least one successful business exit for sure that we're going to talk about, and you're also someone who openly talks about your challenges and your journey dealing with mental health and specifically bipolar disorder. So we're gonna talk a lot about that and the kind of crossover between entrepreneurship and mental health. But why don't you drill in for the listener? What are you up to today? Who are you today?
Yeah, thanks, Jamie. I appreciate that. And really excited to be here and be able to talk about not only the entrepreneurship side, but obviously, mental health. So currently today, as you mentioned, I exited Canopy Financial Technology Partners. I know that's a mouthful. Back in 2022, and I spent a little bit of time with another startup in 23, but ended up stepping away from that one. And so right now, unfortunately, I have one tech project that's in stealth mode, so I can't really talk about it.
Got it.
Sorry for all the secrecy. And the other project that has additionally been in stealth mode, which is the other half of who I am today,
Mhm.
is a men's community, largely based around men's mental health, which we will be launching sometime in March, which is called Iron Tribe.
That's awesome. Yeah, I've been following you. We chatted a couple months ago, and I've been following you on social media, particularly LinkedIn, and I just you love what you're putting out there, and it's I highly recommend the listener go give you a follow for sure. Um, let's jump into your backstory. I know you and I were chatting briefly beforehand about the purpose of this show and trying to add value to the listener by discussing adversity. And I know you've been through kind of all three types of adversity that we tend to focus on this show: health, relationship, and financial. Um, you want to kind of address, I know we're going to get into the mental health stuff and how that has, how your journey has and your battles and ups and downs with that have gone. Let's talk about the other two first. Financial and relationship. What comes to mind when I bring up adversity that you've overcome in those two areas?
Yeah, those are great questions. And I think I would say that they actually somewhat all tie together, to
Sure.
be honest. So if it's okay, I think I'm gonna actually just jump
Yeah,
straight into the
absolutely.
mental health and how all of that has
100%.
shaped
And
together.
very quickly, yeah, it's there's no question. They're all related, and
Yeah.
especially for entrepreneurs, it's hard to compartmentalize things for sure. So yeah, let's do it. Where do you want to start?
So I think, in my story, the first place I always go to is 7-year-old Andrew.
Okay.
So at 7 years old was what was my first hypomanic or mixed state episode as a result of being bipolar 2. Now,
Okay.
that was a really long time ago.
Sure.
And as you can imagine, mental health was not a huge topic in the 1980s.
Yeah.
We certainly didn't understand what was going on back there. Very little was known about bipolar. So
Sure.
I was really looked at as a very outgoing little kid who had some pretty significant anger management issues,
Mm.
is what everybody believed. So now I would go another 28 years. It would be 28 years later, Jamie, until I was actually diagnosed, which was in 2010. And throughout those 28 years, living with undiagnosed bipolar 2 created a whole bunch of challenges. So I would later on go on to have a lot of challenges with what people thought was addiction at the
Mm,
time as well,
mm,
which really I was just self-medicating
mm.
to offset the depression and the hypomania related to the bipolar.
Okay.
As you can imagine, that then brings a lot of financial issues and a lot of
Sure.
ups and downs. And I would spend, really, I dropped out of college
Okay.
after about a year and a half. Just couldn't cope. The bipolar, again, still undiagnosed,
Yeah.
having a lot of issues with that. I would go 10 years through multiple industries. I was, a bartender, a waiter, a food and beverage director. I worked in the car industry as a car salesman. I was a furniture salesman. Uh, and it wouldn't be until the early 2000s until I landed into the financial arena, which would later on take me into the fintech space.
Mm,
So that presented a lot of challenges in corporate life as
sure.
well. I would have these outbursts, and it would put a lot of strain on a lot of the relationships
Sure.
that were going on in a corporate
Yes.
setting.
No, that makes total sense. So your mental health challenges bled into your financial life and your relationships. I mean, and again, like we've said, they're not separate. I mean, they're everything is related, and even mental health. And this is a whole burgeoning part of this field. Is related to physical health, and we can get into all that later, but it's not like you can just put mental health on a shelf and it doesn't affect anything else, as it's for sure. So let's define a couple things. What is bipolar disorder and what is bipolar disorder type 2?
Yeah, great. Thanks for bringing that up, Jamie. So there's bipolar 1 and bipolar 2 effectively. So we'll talk about bipolar kind of at a high level, which
Yeah.
is in you have what are called manic or hypomanic episodes and
Hmm.
depressive episodes. So just think of it as a whole bunch of energy and,
Yeah.
the life of the party on one side
Hmm.
and curled up in bed, depressed on the other side.
Hmm.
And in bipolar 1, it can have far greater swing on the what's called manic
Hmm.
side. And a lot of times it can be very damaging.
Hmm.
It can be spending lots of money irresponsibly,
Hmm.
all sorts of addictive
Gambling and
types
things
of
like that.
personalities. Yeah, gambling, sex addiction, drug
Hmm.
addiction,
Hmm.
so on and so forth. In bipolar 1 tends to be caught and treated more often because it's on the furthest end of the spectrum.
Sure.
Whereas
Yeah.
bipolar 2 is
So
there's a little bit
slightly
more
more subtle,
guardrails. Yeah,
right?
it's a little more subtle.
Yeah.
So in my hypomanic stages, I may talk a little bit more. I may
Sure.
get more irritable and have anger outbursts and things like
Yeah.
that. May have like some addictive qualities to it
Hmm.
when it's untreated. Um,
Hmm.
Bipolar 2, though, interestingly, tends to have more depression and more
Mm.
depressive episodes.
Okay.
My particular genre of bipolar
Hmm.
2 tends to also have a lot of what's called mixed state. And that
Okay.
is what is where mania or hypomania and
Yeah.
depression uh, cross
Kind of.
over.
Uh-huh.
And so I will get a level of depression
Yeah.
that has an energetic feel to it. So I'm not stuck in bed, right? So it's not what you would
Yeah.
traditionally associate to
Right.
depression.
It's like a higher energy, like you said, a higher energy level of depression. So yeah, you don't look depressed, quote unquote, right? To the
Exactly.
outsider.
To the
Okay.
average person on the outside, I wouldn't
Yeah.
look depressed, but internally, the
Yeah.
the self-talk, the
Hmm.
lack of desire, passion, like those
Sure.
are very present internally.
Yeah. And for the record, I mean, the normal caveats, neither of us are doctors and we're not giving
Yeah,
medical advice, anything like that.
definitely.
We're not, you're more of an expert than I am, but neither of us are mental health experts. And unfortunately, we've dealt with some of this in our home in the last 12 to 15 months. And so I've learned a lot about it as well. That said, it's ever changing. We've only scratched the surface as far as understanding all of this.
Absolutely.
So we have a long way to go. Neither of us are sitting here saying this is the final word on mental health, or
Definitely.
or we know everything about it. But that's really interesting. So type 2 is a little bit harder to diagnose, I would say, right? Because it's
Yeah.
less
So it's
extreme in some ways. Um, and then there's sort of the mixed bag of mania and depression simultaneously, it sounds like. Just so, is there like, is a phase or an episode, does that last, you know, a day or 6 months
I
or
can, yeah. So the other thing that's kind of tough about bipolar, both one and two, is it's very unique. Every
Mhm.
person with bipolar is like a snowflake, if you will. Uh,
Yeah.
and so I've known folks with bipolar two who have very, very depressive episodes where they can't get out of bed. I've never
Hmm.
had that, so I can't even
Hmm.
necessarily relate to it. Is terms of cycling, even the cycling is very,
Hmm.
very individual.
Hmm.
So mine typically tends to be a couple of months on the depressive side, a couple of
Hmm.
months on the hypomanic side.
Got it.
Although within those,
Yeah,
you can still have your kind of
sure.
ups and downs.
Yeah,
Uh, Now, that being said, mine is obviously diagnosed and
sure.
treated today. So it looks very, very differently than obviously
Yeah.
an undiagnosed, untreated.
No, and I do appreciate you chatting about this and being open about it. It's
Yeah.
I'm sure it isn't easy, and maybe it's gotten easier to talk about since you've come out with this with your own story. But it's such an important. I mean, we're such an important topic. We have a mental health crisis on our hands, and especially in the world of entrepreneurs, there's there's a higher rate of mental health challenges within the entrepreneurial group than the quote unquote average or non-entrepreneurial
Well,
uh, section of people
yeah,
sector, I
and
should say.
interestingly enough, some of the most famous entrepreneurs that you know are
Yeah.
bipolar. So
Okay.
Steve Jobs was bipolar.
Mm,
Richard Branson is bipolar.
mm,
Elon Musk is bipolar. So
yeah.
so bipolar folks are drawn to
Mm,
entrepreneurial pursuits because of that hypomanic or manic. We get like
hmm.
super tunnel vision, so
Yeah.
we can
Okay.
become hyper focused on a
Yeah.
thing, and
Uh-huh.
our brain moves at such speed, and
Right.
we also have a higher level of resilience.
Mm,
So when you spend your entire life going through these ups and downs, it
yeah.
actually gain or builds a significant amount of resilience, which I think for everybody who's
See that.
listening understands, like, if there's one key thing to entrepreneurship,
Well,
it's resilience.
that's so true. And focus. I mean, those are two critical things, especially nowadays in today's world where we're getting bombarded with so much information. There's so many shiny objects
Mhm.
as an entrepreneur. Oh, there's a business I want to start. Focus has become, I think, even more critical to success. So the fact that in your sort of not sort of, but your manic phases, you're more focused and you have more energy and more clarity and more resilience, like you said. I mean, that is a superpower if you're only looking at it in with that
Absolutely.
lens. Yeah.
Yeah, there's no question about it. I mean, there's the old adage of I hate being bipolar. It's awesome. Because to your point, like, there are sides of it that are superpowers,
Right.
and people have asked me this question, if I could take away your bipolar tomorrow, would you let me? And the answer is absolutely not,
Hmm.
which
Okay.
confuses the heck out of people because they're like, wait,
Sure.
what? Like, you talk
Right.
about all these terrible sides to it. And I'm like, yeah, but the great
Yeah.
parts for me outweigh those sides
Hmm.
of it.
Oh, that's great that you can see it that way. That's awesome. And we had the bipolar general Greg Martin on our
Love that
show
guy.
a
Love
little
him.
while ago. Yeah, he's fantastic, and he talked about what a superpower when he was deployed, and that his mania was that he was able to accomplish so much. So that was surprising to me to hear that at that time. Was you think of, oh, bipolar is all bad, everything's all bad. No, it's more a matter of understanding it as best we can and managing it and working with it. And obviously, you know that about that a lot more than I do. So, your backstory again. So it sounds like you did create a lot of ups and downs and a lot of challenges with regard to your financial health and your relationship health and what looked like an addiction, you said, which led to financial challenges. And um, so walk us through kind of, I guess, just say the last 5 or 10 years of your professional career. What did that look like?
Yeah, so diagnosed in 2010, and the I was actually doing a startup with someone else at the time, not my own. I just happened to be I think it was employee 15 or something. Uh, and I got diagnosed. I actually self-diagnosed. I'd had an
Okay.
outburst at work. I was put on leave, unpaid leave, and as you can imagine, freaking out. I was a 30 something, had just moved my entire family across the country for a new startup idea, and
Wow.
so terrifying to say the least.
Sure.
And the very first person I ever told in the HR department said, "Don't ever tell anybody that again." And this just
Wow.
speaks to, for folks to understand, in 2010, we did not talk about mental health. Like,
Hmm.
this is
Sure.
not like it
That's
is today.
Yeah, and that's, to be fair, that's not that long ago,
No,
right? I mean,
it's not.
we're not talking 1910, 1810.
No,
We're talking 2010,
2010,
less
14
than
years ago.
14 years ago, really. Yeah,
Yeah.
absolutely.
And but I wanted a seat at the table, right? I had, at that point in time, I was very focused on climbing, the corporate ladder. I was,
Hmm.
in my, 30s, earlier 30s,
Hmm.
I had my
Yeah.
first director role, was really doing well career wise. My home
Hmm.
life was a bit of a dumpster fire, but
Mm.
that's a totally different story. So yeah, so I got diagnosed. I didn't talk to anybody about it.
Now, let me
My
just briefly,
Oh
I'm
yeah.
sorry to jump into the HR rep.
Mhm.
I'm guessing they were trying to help you.
Oh,
Is that
absolutely. They had nothing but my best interest at heart because they knew if I came out and I was public about this, that it would be career suicide.
right?
Because back then it was. I mean, you have to
Right.
remember, it's so bipolar is still considered a disability. I
Mm.
don't see it that way
Hmm. Hmm.
personally,
Hmm.
mine. But technically we do fall into that category.
Yeah.
And she just knew like where I was headed and what I
Hmm.
wanted to do. And
Sure.
she knew nobody was going to give me a seat at the big kids table
Got it.
if I was the quote
Yeah.
unquote crazy one, because
So,
again,
yeah,
2010.
now it makes sense now that, and it makes sense that you would listen to that advice. I mean, why would you just ruin your own career?
It's absolutely.
Okay. So, and then so you have an outburst at work and you're essentially not essentially, you're sent home on unpaid leave. And then what happens?
Yeah, so that's where I started doing a lot of digging. I was on Google like crazy trying to figure
Hmm.
out like what the heck's wrong with me. Like I didn't want to be this way, right? Like
Sure.
it just I knew something was wrong. I just didn't know what.
Yeah.
Uh and so I went to psychiatrist for the first time in my entire life.
Hmm.
And I was like, listen, I think I'm this thing. I think I'm bipolar 2. Like I've read
Hmm.
all the things, and basically he was like, yeah, that checks. And at that point in time, I went on a mood stabilizer,
Hmm.
Lamictal,
Okay.
which did an okay job.
Okay.
At that point in time, the drugs were still not very well understood for
Hmm.
bipolar,
Yeah.
the way that they are today. My
Hmm.
medication protocol looks very, very different now.
Hmm.
Uh, but the biggest problem was I didn't talk to anyone. And so, like a good little Gen Xer, I listened
Yeah.
to my doctor and I took my pill and I thought, this is as
Yeah.
good as it gets.
Right. And let me just because again, this has been front and center for us at home recently. Just this is my own take, right? I'm not anti-medication. by any stretch, but I do think there's a risk that we run in prescribing these medications and saying in acting like that's going to solve all your problems,
Ah,
because then you don't. And I know, and I follow you, and I know you have clean eating habits and other things I'd love to get into here, but you shouldn't stop there. The medication is not going to be the end all be all. So so to me, that's the risk we run. And a doctor gives you a prescription and then says, good luck. There's so much more to this than just the
yeah.
prescription. Is that fair?
Absolutely. So one of the things I always say is you can't out medicate lifestyle protocols and you
Mm,
can't out lifestyle medication protocols.
mm,
You,
okay.
for
Yeah.
me,
Yeah. Absolutely.
for me, I absolutely have to have both. And what can be very frustrating for some folks is getting the medication protocol is difficult. It takes time.
Hmm.
I unfortunately had not advocated for myself because I had
Hmm.
gone into hiding. So I would actually go about 11 years on
Mm,
what I would tell you today was the wrong medication
mm.
protocol. I
Wow.
would also go 11 years with effectively no lifestyle protocol. So
Mm,
I wouldn't understand why it's important for me to have a predominantly meat-based keto diet, or
hmm.
why cold plunges are extremely important for
Mm,
me. Did one this morning. Uh,
nice.
of the practice of meditation, why sleep is like the
Sleep is
absolute
huge. Sleep
number
is
one
huge.
thing, right? So
Yeah.
there's all of these pieces that go into it. So yeah,
Right.
100% you gotta have both sides.
Yeah, absolutely. And I recall, it wasn't for me, but being in a psychiatric facility last year, and it was dark, and the food offered there was extremely unhealthy,
Mm,
and so there's not much
yeah.
sunlight going. There's no exercise. I mean, all these things that we all need, whether we have these conditions or
But I
not.
need it more than you.
Well, yeah, that's fair. That's fair. But we all need it.
Right?
And
Yeah,
and I
absolutely.
mean, and let's be honest, there's still a lot we don't know about this. You might, you know, can it be prevented? I don't know, probably not. As far as, are you born with it? I guess so, right? But there's still a nebulous part of this whole mental health thing. And so all I'm saying is, whether you've been diagnosed with bipolar disorder type 2 or not, you should engage in these healthy living
Absolutely.
habits
100%.
that you're talking about.
Yeah.
Um,
I'd recommend that lifestyle protocol to anyone for sure.
Absolutely. So, okay, so you go 11 years with essentially just not, uh, correct me if I'm wrong, but you're kind of perpetuating the problems that you have, and you're on the wrong medication, and you're not living a healthy lifestyle. Is that what you said?
Yeah, I always describe it as I had been walking along in a ditch on the side of the road,
Hmm.
and somebody handed me a Geo Prism. And
Hmm.
for anybody who's not a Gen
Hmm.
Xer or
Yeah.
a boomer, that was a really crappy car back in the 90s.
Yeah.
And I thought, oh my gosh, this is so wonderful. But what I didn't realize was everybody else was driving a Porsche 911 GT, right? And so here I am just sort
Yeah.
of limping along, like I said, like
Right.
thinking this is as good as it's gonna get.
Sure.
But yeah, you're 100% right. Still having some struggles, but really still so hyper focused on
Hmm.
this climb to the C-suite. That's what I really wanted.
Yeah.
Was I thought that was what was going to validate Andrew,
Hmm.
and that once I got there, I would be
Hmm.
happy and that would
Right.
solve all my problems.
Yeah.
Sort of situation. And
I'm
then
guessing
the
guessing
and
it
then the
didn't.
pandemic happened.
And then the pandemic happened. Yeah, that was a big one. So talk us through the last few years of your kind
Yeah.
of, yeah,
So
how have things gone for you?
So in 2020, I had in 2019, I was helping to do a startup division within an existing company out in Southern California. It was going amazing. We really built out a fantastic team, and then the pandemic hit, and I
Hmm.
got on a plane and I flew home. It was the morning after they canceled the NBA season. I'll never forget.
Oh yeah, that was huge. That's when I realized this is a big deal.
Yes, me as well. I was like, I'm glad that Adam Silver is the one who's decided that like the pandemic
Right.
is real,
And I
right?
don't even really follow the NBA. It was just like
Yeah,
that's when
yeah,
I
it's just
realized this is a big deal. So,
so, a couple of months into the pandemic, the PE firm behind the company, realized they needed to cut costs, and
mhm,
understandably so. We didn't know what was going on with the secondary market.
sure.
We didn't know how long this was going to last. So we ended up parting ways in the summer of 2020. And shortly thereafter, I had a friend who called me up and said, "Hey, we should start our own company."
Hmm.
And I was like, "You're crazy. You realize the world is in lockdown, right?" And so we would spend about a month talking through it. And by September of 2020, we decided, hey, let's give this a go. We went out, did our pitch deck, raised our first, seed capital round, shockingly fast.
Hmm.
It was literally a whirlwind. I think it was about 3, 4 weeks from, first pitch deck to actually, having secured the seed round. So we
Wow.
incorporated the company September 29th of 2020. It was also on my youngest son's birthday, so I'll never
Hmm.
forget that one.
Nice.
And we would, go into stealth mode at that point for roughly 4 months, give or take three,
Okay.
4 months at that point. And, I can tell you in that stealth mode period, there were multiple things that made me think, oh gosh, we're not going to be able to do this. Oh my God, we're going to burn through the seed money and
Hmm.
the plane is never going to take off. I think that's one of the things, if you've got any budding entrepreneurs
Yeah.
listening, is
Yeah.
being that unicorn 7, 8, 9 digit exit on an
Mhm.
entrepreneur. Like you got the same chances of being Patrick Mahomes. And I think we don't talk enough about this, right?
100%.
Is
It's so the odds are very much stacked against you for a successful to run any successful business, honestly.
Yeah,
Um,
it's and so I think a lot of people jump into this thinking like,
mhm.
oh, like I'm gonna do this thing. And it's, I
Yeah.
don't know the numbers on it, Jamie, but
Yeah.
it's less than 5%, I'm sure, of people who ever found their own company, even
Yeah.
fewer who exit, and like teeny
So
tiny
last
that
week's
exit
episode that
successfully.
came out a week ago from today, he goes into the numbers actually.
Oh,
And
great.
it's very, and so if you missed that episode, go back and listen to that one.
Yeah, for sure.
Very, very, very difficult to have to found a successful business and then exit it. So, I mean, yeah, and so tons of ups and downs. Entrepreneurship is not easy. I don't want to discourage anyone, but it's not what you see on social media all the time for sure.
Absolutely. Now that being said, I love it, and I
Yeah,
think
yeah,
I'm
me
about
too.
to do it, and I'm about to do it again. Why? I'm not sure.
Yeah.
Some days,
So
this
so
does. Oh,
I'm sorry. I was just, what kind of business was this? I don't know if we said.
yeah. So it was a tech-enabled financial services. So it was
Got it. Yep.
effectively kind of like a data validation oracle for the secondary market securitizations. I know that
Got it.
all sounds fancy, but it was, cleaning up data, assessing risk on mortgage portfolios, basically.
Got it.
So, this really brings me, I will tell you, if my one tidbit of advice that I
Yeah.
always give to entrepreneurs, and I'm fortunate enough to volunteer in an entrepreneurship high school we have here locally, as well as work
Nice.
with some active entrepreneurs, and that is get a co-founder. Um, Now I had a co-founder. I had an
Yeah.
amazing co-founder, John Levenick. Is a very brilliant and talented attorney out of the Connecticut area, and we'd known each other for about 2 decades. My wife is a solopreneur. She is
Hmm.
a clinical psychologist. She owns two practices that are very successful, one in Chicago, one here in Fort Wayne. And guess what? when my wife is having a bad day, like there's no one else to pick up the
Mhm.
ball and, take care of whatever it is that's needed to be taken care of.
Sure.
And John was huge. It was
Mm.
not only was it the support of John and I to just be able to be like, dude, this is tough,
Yeah, right.
and
Absolutely.
have those conversations, because entrepreneurship can be very lonely also.
100%.
Like,
It's yeah, and this is not, to have a pity party for me. That's not the intent, but absolutely. I mean, I'm busy. I don't say that to trust me. I'm not saying it to brag. I wish I
yeah,
wasn't
no,
as busy,
I know what you
but
mean.
I'm busy and have a lot of calls and meetings and all this stuff. But absolutely, there's not too many people that can really, unless you have a business partner, co-founder, or you plug yourself into a group of entrepreneurs, and be intentional about spending at least some time that way. No, most people don't understand what you're going through. So it can be a
Yes.
very, very lonely, situation, and you're constantly dealing with problems. That's what an entrepreneur and a truly a leader is you're dealing with solving problems. Otherwise, there'd be no purpose of your
You
company.
don't deal with the good stuff. Like, that's what I always say.
Yeah.
Like,
Yeah.
entrepreneurs, Elon Musk, love him or hate him, actually talks
Yeah.
about this, of where like like there's a funnel that goes to the CEO,
Yeah. Yeah.
and
Yeah.
it's
I've
just
seen that. Yeah.
it's all the bad stuff. Like, the
Absolutely.
good stuff goes to other people. Like, we just like process
Correct.
through all the bad crap. And when it's
That's right.
just you, like,
That's
it
really
can be
hard.
very difficult. So
Absolutely.
yeah, so we were really fortunate. We caught all the right breaks. And this is
Hmm.
the other piece that I talk about. Like,
Hmm.
you've got to be talented,
Hmm.
you've got to be hardworking, and you also have to be lucky. Like, people don't talk
Absolutely.
about the lucky factor enough, I
Yes.
feel like.
Well, not
Uh,
not when they're successful, they don't. They-
Right. Like, there's tons of guys smarter than Elon Musk. Like, it's true. But
Right,
the
right.
dude's lucky,
Sure.
right?
That's
He's
true.
got
No,
all the
that's
other components, but
right.
he's also lucky. So,
100%.
we would be really fortunate. We would Flagstar Bank would actually be our first
Mm,
client, that we snatched up in early 2021, and we would go through rocket ship growth.
mm.
So we would 10x the size of the company in 5 months. So we went from 13 employees to 130 employees in a
Wow.
5 month span, which is
Wow.
insane growth.
That's man, Grant Cardone has
Uh,
nothing on you.
it's not
Just kidding.
it's not huge, but it's
That
not huge
is
from a company size, but that sort of rocket ship. And
yeah.
it was fantastic. We had one of the best, oh, actually, no, we had the best culture I've ever been a
Mm,
part of. It was so fortunate. And it was huge. But it definitely had still a little bit of a toll on my mental health. So
okay.
the hypomania would lead to not enough sleep at periods
Hmm.
of time, which would cause to, a fair amount of irritability.
Hmm.
But again, John was really there for me. And that was
Mm,
where that co-founder component was so important. And
sure.
so John really made sure it didn't bleed into the rest of the company,
Got it.
and really helped me out quite a bit.
Mm,
So, what would be the biggest change ever would come in April of 2021. And that was where I decided, through a you know bunch of events that occurred, that I needed to come out about being bipolar.
mm,
And so that set off, a LinkedIn post that would go extremely viral, that was
hmm.
entitled, "This is what bipolar looks like." And
Hmm.
I was amazed at the outpouring of support and
Hmm.
people who were just shocked. They were like,
Mm.
"I thought you had had this easy life,
Right.
this path of gold, sort of
Right,
thing."
right.
And I was like,
Yeah, must be nice to be Andrew.
right, yeah, exactly. And I was like, "Oh, not so much,
Uh,
guys."
right.
So, but even at that point in time, I'll tell you, Jamie, I wasn't as focused on advocating for myself. And that's going to be the big thing I would tell the people as
Hmm.
a takeaway,
Hmm.
is you have to advocate for your own mental health. I have Since that point in
Mm-hmm.
time,
Mm-hmm.
after, we exited Canopy, I got deep dive into my own mental health, and I
Mm-hmm.
started doing a lot of research,
Mm-hmm.
right? And
Yeah.
I actually use large language models like Perplexity to
Mm-hmm.
teach myself more about my own bipolar.
Mm-hmm.
And that would go on to really give me a huge journey in the
Yeah.
lifestyle protocol and the medication protocol.
Yeah. Well,
But
I love that point because I mean that is a theme on our show across almost every episode is just taking ownership of your situation and advocating for yourself. That is not to say you're all by yourself, you're alone, no one else cares, and I mean you already talked about the importance of teamwork and a co-founder and those connections and having other people you can rely on. But at the end of the day, the medical system is not gonna advocate for you, at least the way it's set up, now.
no, absolutely. Yeah, you're right.
So you've got to advocate for yourself. I couldn't agree more.
And you could, I mean, unfortunately, sometimes, there's not, we have this belief that every doctor is like a top tier doctor, and
That's right.
that's just not the case.
No.
So, you know, Canopy was on this like high flying,
Uh-huh.
like all is good, growth like crazy. We would do an additional fundraise in late 2021 and move into a stage to get an offer for acquisition. And it was 4x from our initial valuation. So in less than a year to 4x the value of your company, pretty impressive.
Wow.
And we were stoked. Like we've hit, we're the pink unicorn in under a year
Right.
sort of situation, right? And then 2022 would happen and the markets would
Yeah.
go south real fast and the Fed
Sure.
would step in and our 4x acquisition would go
Mhm.
and disappear.
Wow.
And then the Russia-Ukraine war would break
Sure.
out in March, which had a tremendous effect on the secondary markets.
Yeah.
And honestly, Jamie, it felt like 2020 all over again. And it was like, oh,
Wow.
and it would start down a path of layoffs at
Okay.
first. And I will tell again for any budding entrepreneurs out there,
Hmm.
I came from the corporate world.
Hmm.
I have been laid off.
Hmm.
I have laid off for other people. And then
Yeah.
I have laid off when it's my own company.
Hmm.
There is nothing more emotionally
Hmm.
just
Yeah.
devastating than having to lay someone off who, and you
Right.
can probably relate to this,
I
who
can.
I felt personally responsible for those
Yeah.
people. I don't mean this may sound wrong, but I viewed every employee of that company as like a
Hmm.
child of mine.
Hmm.
Like they were
Yeah.
my responsibility. Their family was my responsibility.
Sure.
And I mean, Jamie, I
Well, it's
broke
part
down
of
and
the
yeah.
yeah, broke down in tears. I mean, it's part of the reason, part of the appeal for a lot of entrepreneurs in hiring people is you want to, rising tide lifts all ships, right? So you want to help your team out along the way. You want your employees to be successful financially, right?
Yeah,
So
absolutely.
then the converse, the flip side is, okay, this didn't go well. Now I'm letting you go.
Yeah.
Yeah, I've been there and it is not fun. I know we are pushing our time here. Um, so what did the exit look like? About 2022
Yeah,
to
so
2024.
2022 continued to be a fight on the financial side. It was a struggle. It never got any easier. And then in late 2022, we really were in a position of, where we needed the company to be acquired.
Hmm.
We were fortunate enough to find a competitor who wanted to acquire the organization,
Hmm.
largely for the client base and for the reputation that we had built.
Hmm.
And so it would have been late December We
Hmm.
signed the papers to have the company acquired. As part of that, I actually stepped away pretty much immediately because it was
Okay.
fairly duplicative for the
Okay.
organization that was acquiring, and again, not in a great market. And
Sure.
so I would step away from that,
Hmm.
and like I mentioned, I would just spend time focused on me and
Yeah.
trying to figure out my own bipolar, my journey, and then
Yeah.
really what was next for me, which is, landed me to where we are today and
Yeah.
a place I'm super excited. I'm as pumped for 2024 as any year I've ever been. I will tell you
That's,
that.
that's awesome. Yeah, we're gonna, as we wrap up, I want to find out more about that. I had Kevin Dahlstrom has been on the show. For the listener, he's been on twice, and a similar story with regard to the timing of his exit. It was a fintech called Swell, and it was looking amazing. And then 2022 happened, and he was able to exit, for a profit, but it wasn't the grand slam he was
Right. It
hoping
wasn't
for.
the pink unicorn he had hoped.
Exactly. So now tell us more before the rapid fire round. Tell us more about what you're up to today. Dive into that for us, if you would.
Yeah, so there's kind of two sides to me today. One is I still just have a deep love and excitement and passion around emerging tech. So I am working on something over on the tech side that is in stealth mode. So
Hmm.
unfortunately, we can't
Hmm.
really talk about that at all. The other piece is men's mental health became really important to me over
Sure.
the last 4 to 5 months. I've had a whole series of events that the universe just kept shoving me into that
Hmm.
path. And so I'm working, we'll launch in March with a
Hmm.
men's community that's really focused on combating a lot of the things that are going on of this epidemic of not only loneliness that we're seeing with men,
Yeah.
but obviously all the things that we know. When you look at the stats, you know, it's an epidemic really in this
Sure.
country. Men are responsible for 100% of mass shootings,
Mm.
uh, 85 to 95% of homicides.
Hmm.
We make up 80% of suicides.
Mm.
70, this is a crazy one. 70 to 90% of all divorces are initiated by women. If the woman
Mm.
is college educated, it's 90%. And so
Wow.
we just knew that something needed to be done. And me and a group of gentlemen, we were tired of everybody talking about the numbers.
Hmm.
And we
Right.
realized that people really needed connection
Sure.
and
Absolutely.
transparency. And so, yeah, so that's what this is going to all be about. And,
It's
look
awesome.
towards next month or March, we'll start having some stuff coming out about it.
That's really, really good. Yeah, it's absolutely needed. It's specifically for men, like you've said, and like you're focused on. There's a huge need there. So unfortunately, there's a huge need there, but I'm glad
Yeah.
you're doing something about it. Yeah, I'm learning more and more about it every day. And so the crossover, the high numbers in entrepreneurship, do you think that I know you said people with mental health challenges or conditions are drawn to entrepreneurship. Do you think that being an entrepreneur can lead to mental health challenges or episodes, or is it kind of
Absolutely. Yeah,
okay?
I do.
Yeah, yeah,
I think if you don't understand the stress that you're getting into, and if you
yeah.
don't have the support mechanisms and the psychology around finances and things like that, it can absolutely lead to some damage.
For sure. I'm looking at a graphic on a visual capitalist. I know you're not supposed to refer to something that people can't see on an audio presentation, but mental health and entrepreneurs, and it's got a really easy to interpret graphic that shows addiction and bipolar specific depression, ADHD, addiction, and bipolar, and the high rates among the entrepreneur group out there. So recommend the listener check that out. All right, I know we're about out of time here, Andrew. This has been really, really good. Um, what's one thing that people misunderstand about you?
What is one thing people miss? Even though I'm an extroverted extrovert, I oftentimes have a difficult time if I'm in a situation with a large group of people that I don't know. So like if you sent me to a conference where I don't
Hmm.
know anyone, it's a
Hmm.
very intimidating environment for me.
Got it. What is a book that you could recommend? I know you have several back there behind you.
Ooh. I apologize. You're not going to get just one from me. So, the
All
number
good.
one business book that every entrepreneur should read is Idea Flow by Jeremy Utley, who used to be the head of the D School,
Okay. Yeah.
at Stanford. Number two, and that one is behind me. Number two is also behind me, which is Man Enough by Justin Baldoni. And I would say that every man who's struggling with masculinity and what that looks like for them
Mm-hmm.
should 100% read that book. And lastly, I would say anybody who has someone in their life who's bipolar, who thinks they might be bipolar, or who is bipolar, should
Mm-hmm.
1,000% read the book by Chris Hagen called Bipolar Not So Much. It does the best job I've ever seen of really laying out what's bipolar one, what's bipolar two, what are the important lifestyle protocols, and what are the important medication protocols, and really lays out the why in
Mm-hmm.
all of those things.
Okay, it's really good. I'll throw one more. I don't know if you've read this one, but Brain Energy by Chris Palmer. Um,
I have
it's
not read this one.
yeah, he's really trying to. It's not quite as tactical as what you just talked about with that book, but it's more. He's trying to change the way we approach mental health as a culture and as a medical community specifically, and tie
Mm-hmm.
in. Basically, the gist of it is that everything starts with the mitochondria, and that he's not saying. Trust me, he's not saying mental health is a made up thing or mental health disorders are not real. He's saying that how all of these things are the physical, mental, spiritual, all of it is connected, and that the neurologists in the world need to be speaking with the mental health professionals, psychiatrists and psychologists and kind of general practitioners, et cetera, that that we need to approach this from a more holistic perspective.
Absolutely. 100, yeah, can't
So
agree more
brain
on that.
energy is the one I'll throw
All right,
out
I'm gonna
there.
have to read that one.
It does kind of leave you with, okay, what do I do in my, what do I do now? If we're dealing with this tactically, but I love what he's doing, big picture wise. Um, Andrew, what's one question that I haven't asked you that you wish I had?
One question that you haven't asked me. Whew. I don't know. I feel like there were so many
We've covered a
questions.
lot.
There's so many questions there.
Anything you want to chat about before we sign off?
No, I mean, I think again that just, if we've got any budding entrepreneurs, there's a couple of things to remember. One, I always recommend to everybody that you have a co-founder. Um, Number two is understanding that it's a grind and you've got to love the journey. If you're expecting windfalls of money, you're gonna be good chance you might be disappointed.
Yeah.
And the last one I will tell you is someone who thought he was going to have a gigantic exit and then has the carpet ripped under him.
Yeah.
Fortunately, I didn't make any bad decisions, but I've heard of a lot of people who,
Hmm.
they counted their eggs before they
Hmm.
hatched.
Gotcha.
And that's an important reminder is
Yeah.
in the entrepreneurial world, things can change really fast, really,
Very
really
true.
fast. So
Very true. No, and don't compound what might be a problem by creating a much bigger problem. The other thing I'll
absolutely.
throw in is what you said earlier about advocating for yourself on the mental health side. That was a key takeaway for me as well. Andrew, where can our listeners reach out to you online?
Really, the place that I am, Jamie, almost all the time is LinkedIn. It's the only social media platform that I use a lot. I do speak largely on my page about men's mental health, and it's just literally simply Andrew DeGood. I think I might be the only Andrew DeGood on LinkedIn, so I'm pretty easy to find on that front. And if any listeners, any follow-up questions they have for me, I'm always open to new connections and just shoot me a DM on there.
Fantastic. This has been really, really good. I appreciate everything you're doing. And like I said, I've been following you on LinkedIn, and it's all really good stuff. And I wish you nothing but the best in the future. And to the listener out there, thank you for spending your most valuable resource with us, and that is your time. Thanks, everyone. Take care.